They left me by the window, not with words, not with a conversation or a final kiss to the forehead, just a shift in their routine, a new silence. One day, my chair was rolled closer to the far wall facing the street, and nobody wheeled me back. No one asked what I wanted. No one said, "We'll be back soon." They just stopped. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I'd been in recovery before. I knew how hospitals and care homes worked, how schedules overlapped, how staff changed. I waited for my daughter to visit, as she always did on Wednesdays. I waited for my son to call. I waited for the nurse. I liked the one who warmed my hands before blood draws. I watched for them. I smiled at every sound in the hallway. I stayed ready. But no one came. Not that day, not the next, not the day after that. The other residents began to talk around me, not to me. The staff began to move me like furniture, and when they did speak, it was in clipped professional tones. Ms. Halberg needs repositioning. Has she had her meds? Watch her fluid intake. She's still on the threshold. I became a list of tasks, not a person. I was 78 years old. I'd raised 2 children, buried a husband, nursed my sister through ovarian cancer, and paid off a mortgage with money I made scrubbing other people's toilets. I wasn't supposed to be anyone's burden. I was supposed to rest now. I was supposed to be held with the same love I had poured into others. Instead, I was sitting in a chair by the window, wrapped in a sweater that wasn't mine, with bruises on my arms from IVs that no one explained to me anymore. I watched the cars go by. I watched the sky change. I counted the cracks in the sidewalk. I watched for my family. I waited. And then I started listening to the voices that no one thought I could still hear. That's when I learned the truth. The night nurse, her whisper, no next of kin. No one picked up. The daughter's number is out of service. The administrator, his clipboard patient, listed as indigent. Financial support ceased. Family signature, here, they've waived involvement. They had signed me away. I stared out the window at a world that was still turning. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just cold. A different kind of cold one that didn't come from the temperature. A cold that began deep in my ribs and spread like snow in the bones. And in that frozen quiet, something in me cracked. Not loudly, just a hairline fracture. Just enough to let the light in. I didn't know yet what I would do, or what strength I still had, or who I would become on the other side of all this. But I knew one thing with terrible clarity. They had left me, and I was going to remember every detail, because someday I would tell this story, and no one would be able to look away. Before the chair, before the window, before the silence, I was a mother with calloused hands and a full schedule. I was the woman who packed lunches at 5 a.m. and paid bills at midnight. My name was Margaret Halberg, but to most people I was just Mom, or Mrs. H, or the one who always shows up. I showed up to bake sales and field trips. I showed up when the water heater broke. I showed up when my husband collapsed on the kitchen floor and the EMTs wouldn't tell me if he was breathing. I showed up when no one else would. When I married Edward in 1971, we had nothing but a second-hand sofa and a rented flat in Queens. He was a mechanic strong and honest with rough fingers that always smelled of oil. I was a part-time cleaner at a school still figuring out how to stretch a can of soup over 2 dinners. But we were happy. Poor, yes, but rich in other ways. Edward read poetry when he was drunk and sang old Motown songs when he was fixing the car. He loved me in ways that didn't need words. That was enough. Then we had Anna, and 2 years later, Jacob. I stopped working outside the home when Jacob was born. Edward took on extra shifts. I learned how to sew, how to can vegetables, how to make dollar store shampoo last twice as long. We never had vacations, but our house was always clean, always safe, always filled with the smell of coffee or stew or hope. I was proud of that. I poured myself into my children. I was the mom who stayed up making costumes out of paper bags and glue sticks, the mom who helped rewrite entire school essays because they just didn't feel right, the mom who learned how to braid hair by practicing on a pillow. I still remember how Anna used to trace the freckles on my arms when she couldn't sleep. I still remember Jacob asking if I would live forever. I told him, "Not forever, baby, but I'll be here as long as I can." What I didn't realize then was that being here meant slowly fading out of my own story. After Edward passed too young a heart attack at 54, everything fell on me. I didn't complain. I sold my rings. I took cleaning jobs again. I paid off the last of the mortgage by denying myself heat in the winters and meat on the table. Every birthday, I gave them what I couldn't afford. Every Christmas, I stitched joy out of coupons and prayer. I thought they knew. When Anna got into college, I took out a loan in my name. When Jacob wrecked his car senior year, I dipped into my tiny emergency savings to help him fix it. I never expected them to pay me back. That's not what mothers do. But I expected them to remember. I expected that when the day came, when my knees gave out, when the world grew fuzzy around the edges, when I needed someone to button my blouse, I thought one of them would be there. Just one. I never thought I'd be alone. I never thought the same girl who cried in my lap after her first heartbreak would one day stop answering my calls. I never imagined that Jacob, my sweet boy, who used to press dandelions into my palm like they were treasure, would be the one to sign the waiver. I used to make excuses for them. They're busy. They live far. Maybe they're trying to protect me from seeing them struggle. But deep down I knew people don't leave because they forget. They leave because it's easier. Easier not to face the woman who gave them everything when they have nothing left to give back. Easier to pretend the hospital bills and the diapers and the broken spine of sacrifice never existed. Easier to reduce me to a bed or a chair or a monthly invoice they chose to ignore. The past I gave them wasn't perfect, but it was built with devotion. It had fingerprints, sweat blood, and quiet prayers embedded in every wall of that house. And I watched it get swallowed by their silence. I don't think they're evil. That's the part that still stings. It would be easier if they were, if I could hate them, scream at them, burn old pictures, and forget their names. But I can't. Because I still remember the way Jacob said mama when he scraped his knee. Because I still remember Anna braiding my hair after Edward died when I was too sad to move. Because love doesn't evaporate. It just turns into something heavy, something you carry alone until it starts to crush your bones from the inside. I used to dream of us laughing again. Now I dream of saying goodbye and meaning it. I think the worst part wasn't the silence. It was how familiar it started to feel. Like I'd always been meant for this corner by the window. Like my body knew how to sit still for hours. Like I was slowly disappearing, one small habit at a time. No more asking for extra sugar in my tea. No more humming while I waited for pills. No more counting how many steps I could take on my good days. Just stillness. Just less. Less movement, less noise, less of me. At some point, I stopped correcting people when they called me Margie. My name is Margaret, always has been, but that name belonged to someone who argued, who asked questions, who fought back. I hadn't seen her in a while. The nurses were kind in the way people are kind to wallpaper. Smiles, short pleasantries, hands on your shoulder like punctuation marks. But they never lingered, never looked me in the eyes for too long. There was something in their gaze of polite discomfort, as if I reminded them of something they didn't want to imagine for themselves. I understood. I wouldn't want to be me either, but I was still watching. Every day I sat there, my chair angled just enough to catch the hallway shadows. The young man in room 6 cried every morning. The woman across from me hoarded dinner rolls in her bedside drawer. The janitor hummed the same gospel tune during night shifts. I noticed everything, especially the changes. The first time Anna didn't send flowers for my birthday, I told myself she must have forgotten the date. The second year, I told myself she was saving money. But by the third year, I didn't bother opening the curtains. I already knew nothing would come. Jacob used to text the nurses, asking for updates. They told me once offhandedly before he stopped altogether. I think he made it a habit to ignore anything with care facility in the subject line. Maybe it made him feel less guilty, but guilt is funny like that. It lingers. It grows teeth in the quiet. And I think they knew, even before I did, that something had shifted in me. It began with the dreams, not the kind with colors and wild stories, but the kind that replay real moments only with the sound turned off. I would see Edward walking down the hallway toward me, holding a bag of groceries. He'd smile, but his mouth wouldn't move. He'd reach out, then fade just before I could take his hand. Other times, it was my children, smaller, brighter, still full of need and wonder. Anna with pigtails, Jacob with scraped knees. But even in those dreams, they stood just out of reach, like they were already walking away. I started keeping a notebook. Someone had left it on my nightstand by accident. A blank little journal with a cheap faux leather cover. At first, I used it to track which pills made me feel nauseated. Then I started writing down memories, one every day. One good thing I didn't want the silence to take from me. Anna's first piano recital. She wore the yellow dress. She looked like sun. Jacob learning to ride his bike. He didn't cry when he fell. He laughed. Edward, the way he danced when we got the loan approved. I didn't write to remember. I wrote to hold the pieces of myself together. If I stopped, I was afraid I'd unravel, that I'd become just another frail woman in a window seat, waiting for a name no one said out loud anymore. And then one night I overheard them. It was a conversation they didn't mean for me to hear. My door had been left slightly ajar. I was half asleep, but my ears never fully rested anymore. She's not lucid enough to make decisions, the nurse whispered. Still no contact from the family, someone else asked. No, we're starting the transfer paperwork next week. They'll move her to long-term hospice, state-funded. The words didn't sting the way I thought they would. They didn't pierce. They just landed. Heavy, final, hospice. Not because I was dying, not yet, but because someone decided I wasn't worth saving, that I no longer had a place in the world beyond a quiet room with locked wheels and a view of a parking lot. And maybe they were right. Maybe this is how it ends for people like me, women who give until they vanish. Women who are too soft to be remembered, too strong to be pitied. But as I sat there, my hand resting on the edge of the little notebook, I felt something unexpected, a flicker, like a spark under a layer of ash. Not rage, not yet, but a question. What if I wasn't done? What if I could still leave something behind? Not just stories, not just memories on paper, but something solid, something that couldn't be ignored. I didn't know how, not yet, but the silence had gone too far. And I was ready to break it. The idea came slowly, not like a light bulb, not like an epiphany, just a quiet shift in the air around me, the way a room feels right before a thunderstorm. Something inside me stopped accepting. That was all. No more nodding when the nurse said, "You don't need to worry about that, sweetie." No more pretending I didn't hear the administrator's whisper in the hallway. No more smiling just to make other people comfortable. I wasn't going to be comfortable anymore. I was going to be clear. It began with a single page in my notebook. At the top, I wrote, "Who am I now?" And below it, I started to list the things they had forgotten about me. I held a job for 40 years. I survived grief without therapy or medication. I fixed broken sinks with duct tape and determination. I raised 2 children on 1 income. I paid taxes, voted donated blood, baked birthday cakes. I mattered. I read those lines back to myself again and again, like scripture. It was the first time in years I felt like I was talking to someone who truly listened. Me. The second page was harder. At the top I wrote, "What have they taken?" That list poured out faster. My name, my choices, my savings, my voice in my own care, my dignity. By the time I reached the bottom, I realized what I had done. I had made an inventory of loss, of erasure, and something about putting it down on paper, making it real, made it feel possible to undo. I began asking questions. Small at first, manageable. What's in this medication? Can I see the chart? Who signed the last authorization for hospice evaluation? The nurses fumbled. They weren't used to resistance from people like me, quiet, thin, fading at the edges. But I wasn't fading. I was sharpening. Then came the day they brought in a social worker. I'd heard about her from other residents. They said she was efficient, polite, and always in a hurry. She entered my room with a practiced smile and a folder full of forms. I asked her to sit. She didn't. That told me everything. She started talking about transition options, state funding, next of kin, unreachable, and best possible quality of life, given your circumstances. I let her talk. Then I said slowly and clearly, "I want to see the release forms, the ones my children signed." That stopped her. She blinked eyes, narrowing, recalculating. "They're not public records," she said. "They're about me," I replied. "I didn't give consent. I wasn't declared legally incompetent. And if you move me without my agreement, I will file a petition for unlawful relocation." She smiled tighter. "That's a very strong statement. I'm a very tired woman, tired of being moved like furniture." That was the first time in months I saw someone take me seriously. Later that night, I asked the evening nurse to bring me my purse, the one that had been stashed away in a drawer for safekeeping. I found my old reading glasses, scratched but functional, and a prepaid phone I'd forgotten I even owned. It was dead, of course, but the charger was still in the bottom pocket, wrapped around a crumpled tissue, and a peppermint from God knows when. I charged it. I waited, and then I called an old friend. Her name was Lorraine. We hadn't spoken in nearly 6 years, not since Edward's funeral, when grief pulled us in different directions. But she picked up on the second ring. "Margaret." Her voice cracked like ice under sunlight, and I broke. For the first time in all these long window-lit months, I cried. Not the polite tears I sometimes let fall when I was alone, not the silent ones that dried on my pillow. I cried like someone who remembered what it meant to feel. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "I'll come." Lorraine was never one for drama, but she had fire in her bones. She arrived 3 days later in a battered gray Buick lipstick, smeared eyes sharp. She wasn't family, so they gave her hell at the front desk. But she insisted. She had paperwork power of attorney I had signed years ago, buried in a drawer forgotten, until I remembered it in a flash of stubborn memory. She presented it like a sword. Suddenly, everything changed. I wasn't just a quiet old woman anymore. I was a legal entity. I had rights again. I had someone willing to stand in front of me and say no. We spent hours reviewing documents. Lorraine read out loud what my children had signed. Waivers, disclaimers, agreements to cease financial support, statements of non-interest, none of it illegal, all of it cold. And then in a sealed envelope marked for file, we found a letter from Anna, short, typed. I am unable to care for my mother due to personal family matters. Please proceed with state-funded support. This is in her best interest. No salutation, no signature, just a printed name at the bottom and a line that might as well have been a gravestone. Lorraine folded it slowly. Are you okay? She asked. No, I said, but I'm awake now. I asked her to help me draft something, not a revenge plan, a will. Not because I had much to leave, I didn't, but because I wanted to make sure the story of who I was didn't end in someone else's sentence. We sat by the window together and I dictated, word by word. With every breath I took something back. They came 2 weeks later, both of them. Anna in a pressed blazer, holding a handbag too expensive for someone who claimed to be struggling. Jacob in jeans and a t-shirt, looking uncomfortable in his own skin, or maybe just uncomfortable being in mine. I wasn't told they were coming. Maybe they thought it would be a surprise. Or maybe they were summoned once Lorraine started asking the right questions. Once my paperwork went somewhere official. Once it became clear I wasn't just going to disappear quietly. They walked into my room like strangers. Not tentative, not warm, just transactional. I could smell the guilt hiding under their perfume and cologne, like they'd rehearsed empathy in the car. Anna spoke first. Hi, Mom, she said like it didn't feel foreign in her mouth. Jacob gave a stiff nod. Hey, I didn't say anything. Not yet. I just looked at them. Really looked. Anna had the same crease between her eyebrows she used to get when she was stressed over midterms. Jacob's shoulders were still slightly sloped, like he was carrying more than he wanted to, but their eyes were different, detached, distant, as if they were looking at a patient, not a parent. Anna pulled a chair up, sat carefully. We heard there was some confusion about your care plan, about your wishes. I nodded once, slowly. She smiled, tight. Well, we're here now. We can sort this out. I turned to Lorraine, seated by the window, not speaking unless I asked her to. She opened the folder in her lap and pulled out the document we had drafted together, my revised will, my new care directive, and the formal complaint we were submitting to the facility's oversight board. I looked Anna in the eyes. There's no confusion, I said. You made a decision. You waived responsibility. I'm simply honoring it. Jacob flinched. Anna blinked. That's not. You signed me away, I interrupted. Both of you. It wasn't like that, Jacob muttered. We didn't know what else to do. You could have asked me. We thought we were doing what was best. Anna said, You weren't answering your phone. You weren't well. I had a stroke, Anna. Not dementia. Silence. Heavy. Still. You didn't even come, I said. When they admitted me here, when they put the IV in, when I couldn't speak for a week, not one of you came. Anna looked down. Jacob rubbed his face like that would erase the last 3 years. Lorraine stayed still, a steady presence, my anchor. I'm not asking for apologies, I said. Not anymore. I just want you to hear something. They looked at me. Finally, there will come a day when you're in this chair, or one like it, when your voice feels smaller than the machines around you, when the people you love stop showing up. And I truly hope, you never feel what I felt. Mom, no, listen, they did. Love is not just what we feel when it's easy. It's what we do when it's inconvenient, when it costs something, when it makes us late for work or drains our bank account or keeps us up all night. That's the love I gave you. That's the love I expected back. Anna was crying now, quietly, like someone who didn't think she had the right to sob. Jacob was still, pale. I let the silence stretch until it felt like truth. Then I said, "You don't owe me anything. You've made that clear, but I owe myself a different ending, one that doesn't look like this." I stood up, on my own, with my cane, with my knees screaming, with every inch of me trembling, but I stood. It was the first time I'd done so in months, and I did it not for them, for me. Anna gasped. Jacob reached out instinctively, but I held up a hand. "I don't need help. I need distance." They didn't know what to say, so I said it for them. "I'm transferring out next week. Lorraine has arranged it. I'll be staying with her until we find a better place. I've submitted my new directives. You'll receive no further financial requests. You won't be burdened. That seems to be what you both wanted." Anna opened her mouth. I closed it for her. "Don't say you love me. Not now, not here. That word deserves better." She looked shattered, but so was I, and I was learning how to rebuild. "Mom," Jacob finally said, "is there anything we can do?" I considered the question. Then I nodded. "Yes." He leaned forward, hopeful. "Live differently," I said. I didn't wait for a reply. I turned back to the window, sat down in the chair, my chair, not theirs, not the state's, mine. Lorraine closed the folder and tucked it away. Anna stood slowly. So did Jacob. They walked out without another word, and I let them go. I left the facility on a Thursday morning. It wasn't dramatic. No tearful send-offs, no handshakes from the staff. Just Lorraine wheeling me past the front desk while the receptionist tried not to make eye contact. The sky was a pale, forgiving gray. Rain had washed the sidewalks clean overnight. The world looked like it had been reset. So had I. I didn't pack much. A few sweaters, my notebook, the faded photo of Edward and me from Coney Island, where he'd insisted we take one of those old black and white booth pictures after eating too much saltwater taffy. He had kissed my cheek just as the camera clicked. I looked surprised in the photo, almost bashful. It was the last time anyone had caught me off guard in a good way. Lorraine's house smelled like eucalyptus and cinnamon. She lit candles in the evenings, made tea with real honey, and played old jazz records I hadn't heard since the early 80s. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't hurt, the kind you can breathe in. I spent the first 3 days sleeping, not because I was tired, but because, for the first time in years, I felt safe enough to rest, the kind of sleep that doesn't flinch at every sound, the kind that isn't laced with dreams of locked doors and silent phones. I woke up different. My body was still weak. My knees still hurt. My hands still trembled when I tried to hold a pen. But inside, something had settled, like a storm that finally ran out of rain. We turned one of Lorraine's guest rooms into a studio of sorts. She brought in a second-hand desk, and I taped old family photos to the wall, not because I missed them, but because I needed to reclaim the narrative, my narrative. I started writing in earnest, not just memories now, but reflections, things I'd never said out loud, things I'd buried so deep, even I forgot they existed. I wrote about the way my father never apologized, but always carved the best part of the roast for me. I wrote about the night I almost left Edward after he lied about a credit card bill and the way he cried when I stayed. I wrote about the joy and the cost of motherhood, about the years I lost being someone else's everything, and the slow, trembling journey back to being mine. Lorraine called it a memoir. I called it a reckoning. One afternoon, I received a letter, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. And Anna, inside was a single page, no apology, just fragments. I didn't know how much I relied on your silence. When you stopped being quiet, I didn't recognize you. I don't know who I am without your forgiveness. There was no request to reconnect, no promise of visits, just an ending in its own way. I stared at the letter for a long time. Then I folded it carefully and slid it into the back of my notebook, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to remember the day I became someone even she could no longer define. It occurred to me then that peace doesn't always come as a gift. Sometimes it's claimed like a stolen piece of yourself, taken back with trembling hands, and a voice you haven't heard in years. Sometimes peace is quiet revenge, not the kind that scorches, but the kind that survives. Jacob wrote a few weeks later, an email forwarded from Lorraine's account. Longer, more sincere, still fumbling, still raw. I was scared, Mom, scared of doing it wrong, scared of being like Dad in the end, worn out and buried by responsibility. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself, but I hope you'll let me try. I didn't answer, not yet, because sometimes the answer is in the waiting. Sometimes the reply is not a sentence, but a new boundary. I go outside now. Lorraine walks with me to the corner every morning, even if my steps are slow. We talk about the world, not politics or pain, just small, beautiful things. The birds that nest under her porch, the old couple who argue every Thursday at the market, the smell of the rain on hot pavement. I am not healed. I don't think I ever will be, but I am whole. And wholeness, even in a body that forgets things, even in hands that can't thread a needle anymore, is enough. I've stopped watching the window. I no longer wait for anyone to come. I sit by the garden now, and sometimes when the light hits just right, I swear I can feel Edward's hand on my shoulder, not to guide me, just to say you made it. You didn't disappear. You are still here. I didn't expect to remember so much. People talk about aging like it's a fog, like memories drift away on some unreachable tide. And in the sterile hum of that facility, I believed that. I believed that parts of me were lost forever, eroded by hospital gowns and antiseptic smiles. But in Lorraine's house, in the warmth, in the quiet, in the slowness of days with no schedule, but my own memory came back like a flood. The first one arrived with the scent of tomato soup, not fancy, just from a can stirred on the stove while Lorraine hummed. But it hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the counter, because suddenly I was standing in my old kitchen barefoot, holding Anna in one arm and stirring with the other. Edward's boots were by the door, wet from the rain. Jacob was on the floor in footy pajamas, banging a wooden spoon against a pot. I could hear the storm outside and feel the quiet joy of surviving another hard day. The second memory came with music, Nat King Cole, playing faintly from Lorraine's radio. And suddenly, I was back in our first apartment, swaying with Edward under dim light, both of us too tired to dance, but doing it anyway because we knew we wouldn't have time tomorrow. I had forgotten those moments, not because they weren't important, but because I'd filed them away under someday I'll remember, and someday had finally come. It hurt. Good memories do. When they return, after you've convinced yourself there's nothing left to feel. But I let them come. I started writing them down again. Not in the notebook this time. I upgraded. Lorraine bought me a proper journal. Thick pages, leather-bound, the kind that begs you to tell the truth. Each entry was a homecoming, not to a place, but to a self I thought had been buried under years of service and silence. And in the remembering, I began to see clearly how I had disappeared, not because they made me, but because I let them. I said yes too often. I absorbed too many disappointments without naming them. I folded my life around theirs like parchment paper, neat, protective, disposable. The worst betrayal wasn't theirs. It was mine, for believing that my worth expired once I became inconvenient, for thinking that being loved meant never asking to be seen, for convincing myself that motherhood meant martyrdom. That's the thing. No one tells you about sacrifice. If you give everything, people will take everything. Not because they're cruel, but because they believe that's what you want. And maybe at some point it was. Maybe I wanted to be needed more than I wanted to be whole, but not anymore. I read old birthday cards from my children, the ones I'd kept in a shoebox Lorraine helped me find. There was one from Jacob, age 10. You're the best mom because you never give up on me. And I realized that I had taught them that. I had taught them that I wouldn't leave, that I would always show up, that I could absorb anything. I had made my love so indestructible that they forgot I was breakable. Now I had to teach them something else, that I had limits, that I could walk away. That silence doesn't always mean peace. I hadn't heard from them since their visit. I wasn't surprised. Change makes people uncomfortable, especially when the person you counted on to stay quiet finally speaks, especially when the version of their mother that made life easier no longer exists. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I had stopped counting the days since their last call. I had stopped staring at unopened messages. I had stopped replaying the scene in that nursing home over and over, trying to find a different outcome. The only outcome that mattered now was this one. Me, here, alive, free, whole, and every memory that returned, every sliver of joy, every flicker of pain, every scrap of the girl I once was before I became someone else's caretaker, stitched me back together in ways that no apology ever could. I didn't need them to come back. I needed to come back to myself. And I had. Lorraine called it my little war, not because there were weapons or enemies in uniform, but because every act of reclamation, every form filled every letter, sent every forgotten password, reset felt like regaining occupied territory. It started with a folder. She brought it to me one afternoon, laid it on the kitchen table, like a peace offering. Inside were copies of every document I'd signed over the last decade. Medical authorizations, bank statements, life insurance policies, emergency contact, forms the paper trail of my quiet vanishing. Most of it's still in your name, she said gently, but your access was quietly filtered. Filtered, that was her word. Mine was erased. I sifted through the documents slowly. Page after page confirmed what I'd already known in my bones. Somewhere along the way, I had been written out of my own story. A medical directive signed without me present. An automatic withdrawal for a private senior care consultation I had never approved. An old savings account marked dormant. No activity in 36 months. I had once kept meticulous ledgers in a spiral notebook next to the rotary phone. I could tell you the price of eggs in 1987, how many stamps were left in the drawer, and when the electric bill was due without looking. Now, I couldn't even tell you the last place my money had gone. Some of it wasn't theft, not exactly, just convenience, quiet shifting, the kind people do when it's easier to make decisions for you rather than with you. It wasn't criminal. It was worse. It was casual. Lorraine and I started a list. One by one, we requested access the credit union, the insurance company, the state's elderly services division. We sat through hours of hold music and condescending voices, but slowly, steadily, my name began to carry weight again. I reactivated my old checking account. I requested paper statements. I filed an official notification to remove Anna and Jacob from my accounts, not to punish them, but to close the open doors they had walked through without knocking. It felt strange, not freeing, not yet, just right. One night I sat at the desk and wrote a letter to myself, not in the journal, on real paper, the good kind. I even spritzed it with lavender water, the way I used to when writing notes to Edward. Dear Margaret, you didn't die. You were buried under years of being useful, and now you've clawed your way out. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to be remembered for more than what you gave. This time you are yours. Love me. I folded it and tucked it between the pages of my journal like a seed waiting for rain. Because I'd realized something as Lorraine read legal disclaimers, and I filled in boxes with shaking hands. The paper trail mattered not just for reclaiming money or medical authority, but for reclaiming the narrative. They had written their version. Now I was writing mine. I wasn't interested in drama. I didn't want lawsuits or vengeance or tabloids. I just wanted the truth to outlive me. So I started compiling everything into a binder, each section marked clearly, before photographs, letters, school report cards, my wedding license, my first paycheck stub, sacrifice, receipts for loans I took to pay their tuition medical bills. I covered letters I wrote on their behalf, silence, the signed waivers, the transfer forms, the months of unanswered messages, return my will, my revised directives, my journal pages, the letters I wrote, and the ones I didn't send. Lorraine joked that I was building a legacy archive. I wasn't. I was building a monument to the version of myself they forgot, to the woman I had to become when there was no one left to defend me, to the truth that doesn't need an audience to matter. Some days I still caught myself wondering if they would write back, if Jacob would try harder, if Anna would show up. But then I'd glance at the binder, feel the weight of it in my lap, and realize I no longer needed their version. I had mine, and paper, unlike memory, doesn't fade when no one visits. It was raining when he came, not a dramatic thunderstorm, just that steady curtain-like drizzle that softens the edges of everything. Lorraine had gone to the grocery store. I was alone, sipping weak tea and listening to the roof sing. The knock startled me. It was gentle, hesitant, the kind of knock that carries apology inside it. I moved slowly to the door, not because of pain, but because of the weight of it, the ache of not knowing who might be standing on the other side, not expecting, not hoping, but still something in my breath caught. I opened it halfway. Jacob stood there, soaked through no umbrella, a plastic bag in one hand, and something tight and trembling in his jaw. "Hi, Mom." I didn't answer. I just opened the door wider and stepped back. He looked older, not in the way mirrors age us, but in the way guilt etches itself into posture. His hair was shorter than I remembered. His eyes, those same brown eyes that used to sparkle when I surprised him with pancakes, looked tired. "I didn't call because I knew you'd say no." "You're right," I said. He nodded. Didn't argue. just stood there, small against the doorway. "I brought you something," he said, holding up the bag. Inside was a bundle of old photographs, the ones that used to sit on the mantel in the house before they sold it. He held out one picture me in the garden sun hat, too big Edward, kissing my cheek, while Jacob buried his face in my apron. "I found it behind a drawer when we cleared out the garage," he said quietly. "I didn't know I'd kept it." "You didn't," I said, "but something did." He smiled barely. His eyes began to glass over, and I braced myself for a speech, but none came. Instead, he asked, "Can I come in?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want to see him, but because I wasn't sure if I wanted to open that part of myself again, the part that knew how to make space for someone who had chosen to leave. I nodded once. He stepped inside. He looked around, trying not to stare too long. The journal was on the table. My cane leaned against the wall. The kettle hissed faintly behind us. "I like it here," he said. "I do too," I replied. We sat, not across from each other, side by side on the little bench by the window. The irony wasn't lost on me. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, not typed, handwritten, his penmanship still a little messy, like in middle school. He handed it to me. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I asked, "Why now?" He looked out the window for a long time before answering, because the silence got too loud. He said, "Because I realized I couldn't keep telling myself I was a good son if I never came back." I opened the letter. "Mom, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I see it now. All of it. The years, the sacrifices, the times I didn't show up, the decisions I made because they were easier than facing your hurt. I thought if I distanced myself, I wouldn't have to feel the shame. But it found me anyway. I want to be better. Not to earn anything from you, but because you taught me to try. You taught me to get up when I fall. This is me getting up. Love, Jacob." I folded it once carefully and placed it in my lap. "I'm not ready," I said softly. "I know," he whispered. "I just wanted to be here, even if it's just for a little while." So we sat, in silence, in the rain, in the ache, and for the first time, it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like a door creaking open, not wide, but enough. Enough for air, enough for truth, enough to begin again. Or not. But at least now, the silence wasn't just mine. That night after Jacob left, I sat in the quiet, holding the letter he'd written me. I hadn't cried when he handed it over. I hadn't cried when he hugged me, gentle, uncertain, like he wasn't sure where my edges had shifted. But after the door closed and the lights dimmed, the tears came on their own, not out of pain, out of recognition. He had used my own words, not directly, but I heard myself in him, in the pauses, in the need to try. And even though my trust was still curled into something wary and quiet, I knew something had shifted between us. I didn't write back. Instead, I opened my journal and wrote a letter I never intended to send. "Dear Anna, you haven't written again. You haven't called. Maybe you're waiting for the dust to settle, or maybe you think your silence protects us both. But I remember you. I remember the way you used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. The way you cried when I pricked my finger on a sewing needle, and how you made me a get well soon card, even though it was only a drop of blood. I remember how you used to sing to stray cats, and how you made me promise to never cut my hair because you liked brushing it. I remember all the softness in you and how the world trained it out of you. I'm not angry anymore, not in the way that burns. I'm just sad that you didn't trust me to hold space for your weakness, that when the time came For you to be the strong one, you chose distance instead. But I also know that some people only learn how to come home once they've lived with their own silence long enough. I hope yours teaches you gently, and I hope one day you find your way back. Not because I need you, but because I would like to know the woman you became when I wasn't looking. Mom, I folded the page and slid it between two others. I knew I'd never mail it. Anna wasn't ready, and maybe I wasn't either, but it felt good to write it, like cracking open a window in a stuffy room. A bit of circulation, a release. Lorraine asked me once if I ever regretted becoming a mother. No, I said, but I regret not knowing where I ended and they began. She nodded like she understood, because mothers aren't just caretakers. We're maps. And the danger is, if too many people read us without asking, we fade until even we can't find our way back to ourselves. I'm not sure I'll ever speak to Anna again. Maybe the silence between us is permanent now, a scar that won't close. But I've stopped hoping for a tidy ending. Real life doesn't give us those. What it gives, if we're lucky, are glimpses of grace. Jacob's visit was one. The letter I didn't send was another. And the truth is, I'm learning to live without applause. That was the hardest lesson. That dignity isn't something you earn from others. It's something you claim in the dark, when no one is watching, when you still decide to rise. Sometimes that looks like standing up to your children. Sometimes it looks like forgiving them quietly, on your own terms, with no expectation of return. I went to bed that night, without replaying our old conversations. I didn't scroll through memories like a desperate librarian. I didn't ache for what could have been. Instead, I placed Jacob's letter on my nightstand, not as a token, as proof that some things lost don't stay gone, that some stories aren't finished just because they stop being convenient, that even love bruised, bent buried, can climb its way out of the ground. It had been over 5 years since I saw the house, not in pictures, not in memory, in real present tense, wood and brick, and peeling shutters, dirt under my feet, and rust on the gate. I'd avoided it even when Lorraine offered to drive me by. There was something about seeing it empty, or worse, change, that felt like a second kind of dying. But one morning, out of nowhere, I said, let's go. Lorraine didn't ask why. She just nodded and warmed the car. It wasn't far, a 20-minute drive from her place, past a strip mall that used to be a field, past the old Lutheran church, where Edward and I were married and where we later buried him. The streets felt both familiar and foreign, like being inside a dream, where nothing's quite where it used to be. And then there it was, the little blue house on Elm Ridge Road. It wasn't blue anymore. Someone had painted it a pale yellow. The fence was gone. The garden I spent a decade coaxing into bloom had been leveled. There was a tire swing, now swaying in the breeze, and a child's bicycle with training wheels leaned against the steps. I didn't cry. Not right away. We parked across the street. I rolled the window down and just watched. A woman came out young, maybe in her 30s. She wore her hair in a bun and carried a basket of laundry. She laughed as she called to a boy inside. I imagined what it must be like for them, starting new. No idea of the ghosts under the floorboards. No memory of the nights Edward carried Anna to bed after she'd fallen asleep on the couch. No echo of Jacob's muddy footprints tracking across the kitchen tile. No scent of meatloaf and Sunday arguments. No awareness of how sacred, how fought for this place once was. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was back inside. Edward's boots by the door, the hum of the fridge that always rattled when it cycled on, the wallpaper in the hallway I never liked but never changed, The way Jacob used to ride his toy truck down the slope of the living room carpet like it was a mountain. The way Anna once painted a mural in her closet and hid it from me for a year, afraid I'd be mad. I could hear laughter. I could hear my own voice, younger, stronger still, sure that love was enough to keep a family whole. The ache came quietly, not a scream, not a wail, just a low, dull pressure behind my ribs. I clutched the seatbelt and let it sit there, not fighting it, just letting it pass through. Lorraine reached over, held my hand. I thought I'd feel angry, I whispered, but I don't. What do you feel? Like I buried someone here, someone I used to be. She didn't speak, just waited. I'm glad it has life again, I said, even if it's not mine, because what they never tell you about homes is that you don't just leave them. You outgrow them. You shed them like skin. And sometimes letting go of a house is how you make room for a new kind of shelter, one that lives inside you. We sat there for a long while, watching the woman hang laundry. At one point, the boy ran into the yard, chasing Bubbles. He looked up at me, not knowing who I was, and waved. I waved back, and in that small moment, I understood something I hadn't before. You don't need to be remembered in order for your love to have mattered. It's okay if no one knows the hours you spent scrubbing baseboards or mending costumes or scraping together rent. It's okay if your name fades from the mailbox and your favorite chair ends up in a dumpster. The love you gave still rooted itself in the walls. It still echoed in laughter. It still whispered from one generation into the next in ways no one can trace, but everyone can feel. That house doesn't remember me, but I remember it, and that is enough. On the way home, I didn't look back, because some goodbyes don't need to be spoken. Some are lived quietly and then released. My 80th birthday came and went with little fanfare. No surprise party, no streamers, no grand gesture of redemption. Just a card from Lorraine left neatly by my morning tea with a handwritten note, "You are still becoming. I'm proud of you." She tucked a sprig of lavender into the envelope. It smelled like calm. There were no calls from Anna, no emails from Jacob, and strangely this time, it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like clarity. I spent the morning alone sitting by the window. Not the one from the nursing home. This one looked out over Lorraine's garden. The roses had started blooming early that year, and a single monarch butterfly floated between them like it had no interest in time or sorrow. I took my tea slowly, every sip a quiet reminder that I had made it here. 80 years. 80. When I was younger, I imagined this age as a place where things stopped, where the body gave up and the world narrowed into routines and reruns and medications lined up like soldiers. But what I've learned, what no one warns you about, is that getting older doesn't mean you stop changing. It just means you get more honest about who you are. I'm not patient anymore. I speak less, but mean more. I don't say yes just to keep the peace. I let go of people who use silence as a weapon. I keep things simple: one sweater, one book, one real conversation a day. I used to think the worst part of aging was being forgotten. Now I understand the worst part is forgetting yourself. I baked my own cake that afternoon. Lorraine insisted on helping, but I told her I wanted to do it alone, just to see if I still could. My hand shook when I cracked the eggs. I spilled flour on the counter, but I sang while I stirred the same way I used to when the kids were little. It rose unevenly, the middle sank, but it tasted like memory sweet, imperfect, real. Later we ate it together on the porch. Lorraine lit one candle. I made no wish, because wishes are for those who need the world to change. I didn't need that anymore. I'd changed enough. That night, I reread Jacob's letter, the one from weeks ago. The ink had started to smudge in one corner, like it had soaked up too much meaning. I didn't cry. I just placed it inside the same envelope as my unsent letter to Anna. Two halves of a story no one else would ever see. Maybe they'd find them after I'm gone. Maybe not. Either way, I was at peace with the truth, staying between the pages. The next morning, there was a small box on the table. No note. Inside was a necklace, simple silver, with a tiny charm shaped like a chair. My chair. Not the one from the window. Not the one they left me in. This one was elegant, handcrafted, and perfectly still. Lorraine said it had arrived in the mail. No return label, no handwriting, just that charm and a soft velvet pouch. I held it for a long time. I didn't need to know who sent it. Maybe it was Jacob, maybe Anna, maybe it was someone who knew that sometimes the best way to honor a woman's pain is to acknowledge where she sat and what she saw and how she never once stood before she was ready. I wore it that day, not for sentiment, for power, a reminder I may have been left in a chair. But I didn't stay there. I got up. I walked. I remembered. And now I live on my own terms in a quiet house with a kind friend with no balloons and no parade, just the steady heartbeat of someone who made it through everything and still knows how to find joy in the taste of her own cake. The attic was small, dusty, crammed with boxes Lorraine hadn't opened in years. On a rainy Tuesday, with nothing pressing, and both of us a little restless, she suggested we explore it like a museum of misplaced lives, she joked. I agreed. Not because I wanted to find anything, but because I felt something pulling me. A hum beneath my skin, a whisper that something in that space had waited long enough. We climbed the narrow stairs slowly. My knees objected, but I pressed on. I wasn't the same woman who used to give up at the first ache. Inside, the air smelled like cedar and mothballs. Sunlight pushed through a single cracked window, spilling light onto a stack of old suitcases and photo albums. Lorraine opened a box filled with Christmas ornaments, each one tangled with memory. I ran my hand across a forgotten armchair, the fabric worn down to threadbare truth. Then I found it. An old shoebox, plain unmarked, taped shut with care. I opened it on instinct. Inside, folded neatly, was a letter, yellowed with age, addressed to me, Vertite kein Ausgehenschens, in Edward's handwriting. The sight of it hit me like a prayer. I hadn't seen his writing in years, not since before the stroke, not since the hospital room where he gripped my hand like it was a rope, tethering him to this world. I unfolded the letter carefully, afraid it might crumble in my hands. Lorraine stood silently beside me. I read, Margaret, if you're reading this, then I'm not there anymore. And I hate that. I hate that I can't hold your hand while you read this, but I needed to say a few things before I ran out of time. You've always been the center of the storm, calm when the world spun, fierce when I forgot how to be strong. You loved me through things I didn't deserve to be loved through. You gave me a home even when we had nothing. And you never once made me feel small for falling apart. I don't know what happens after I go. I just hope more than anything that you don't disappear, that you don't fold yourself into other people's needs so tightly that you forget your own shape. You are allowed to be seen. You are allowed to be loud. You are allowed to live without apology. Promise me one thing. Don't wait for someone to come back in order to begin again. You've always had everything you need inside you. Even if they leave you, even if they forget, you are still you. You are still fire. I love you. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just sat there, the letter trembling in my hands, the truth of his voice settling into the empty places I thought no one could reach anymore. Lorraine touched my shoulder. He knew, I whispered. Knew what? That I'd lose myself. That they'd make me doubt. That I'd wait at windows. That I'd sit in silence and think it was my fault. I pressed the paper to my chest. He knew I'd come back. Sometimes the most powerful gifts arrive when you no longer think you're allowed to receive anything good. When your palms have turned inward and your spine has folded from years of bending to fit someone else's story. But Edward had seen me, even in goodbye, especially then. That night, I reread the letter twice. Then I slipped it into the back cover of my journal, behind the others, not to hide it, but to let it rest near the woman who had finally become the version he believed in. The next morning, I walked alone to the corner of the block. No cane, no hurry. I just stood there, face tilted to the breeze, the sunlight warming the top of my hair like an old familiar hand. And I thought, I am still fire. He was right. It had been years since I stood in a public place and felt visible, not watched, not pitied, visible as in real, as in part of the world. Lorraine and I went to the Saturday market every other week. She said it was for fresh bread and good tomatoes, but I knew it was also her quiet way of reminding me that I belonged outside the walls of memory, that I still had a seat at the table of the living. We'd walk slowly past the flower stalls and honey booths, past old men playing jazz on street corners, past teenagers haggling over secondhand books. I loved the noise, not because I wanted to join it, but because it reminded me the world was still turning, still bright, still stubbornly alive. That day, I wandered a bit further than usual. Lorraine was in the cheese stall. I drifted toward a booth that sold used postcards, hundreds of them, stacked in boxes, some with foreign stamps, others with handwriting so faded it looked like breath on glass. I was flipping through a stack from the 1960s when I heard a voice behind me. Mrs. Halberg. It took me a second to register the name. No one had called me that in years. Not at the nursing home, not in Lorraine's kitchen, not even my children, not anymore. It sounded like a bell rung in a cathedral long abandoned. I turned. A young woman stood there, late 20s maybe. Red scarf, freckles, eyes wide like she wasn't sure if I was real. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I didn't mean to startle you. I wasn't sure it was you. I must have looked confused. I'm Lucy, she said. Lucy Bennett. I was in Jacob's 5th grade class. You used to help with the school plays. You painted our pirate ship set. And suddenly I remembered. Paint on my jeans, a cardboard mast, Jacob refusing to say his lines, Lucy dressed like a seagull, squawking with conviction. I laughed a sharp, unexpected sound. Lucy, I said, you broke your wing the night before the show and cried like your world was ending. Her eyes lit up. You remembered. How could I forget? You had the most dramatic waddle I'd ever seen. She laughed then, and so did I. It felt like spring in the middle of my chest. I saw you once, she said more softly. Years later, at the store, you were alone. I wanted to say something, but you looked so tired, like you were carrying something heavy. She hesitated, then added, you look different now. How so? Lighter, not in weight, in the way you stand. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. She hesitated again. I always remembered you. You were the mom who showed up every time. You never missed anything. I smiled, but something inside me bristled because that was the story, the legacy, the version of me that had been cemented in time, the woman who showed up, the giver, the ever-present cheerleader in the bleachers of other people's lives. I wanted to be more than that. I wanted to say, I'm not just someone's mother anymore. But then she said, when my mom died, I thought about you, about how you were always calm when the rest of us panicked. You were the first adult who made me feel like I wasn't invisible. And just like that, the resentment softened. Because what I had given had mattered, even if my children had forgotten, even if the people closest to me had turned away. There had been witnesses. There had been echoes. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small postcard. I bought this, she said. Thought you'd like it. It reminded me of those plays. She handed it to me. It was an old photo of a lighthouse, weathered and crooked, with waves crashing beneath it. She smiled. You were kind of like that. I held the card in both hands. I wasn't always steady, I said, but you didn't fall. She squeezed my arm. That counts. She walked away, then disappearing into the crowd, scarf trailing behind her like a ribbon of memory. I stood there in the middle of a noisy street with a postcard in my hand and a strange ache in my throat, because for the first time in a very long time, I felt like the story of me, the whole of me, was not lost. It had been scattered, yes, but not forgotten. Grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives like a whisper, a pair of shoes, you stop reaching for a recipe, you no longer cook, a photo frame turned face down one day and never set back up. It doesn't need to announce itself. It waits in the soft corners, in the choices you make without thinking, in the things you quietly let go of. That month I began taking inventory, not of what I owned. I didn't care much for that anymore, but of what I had buried without ceremony. First on the list, my piano. It had been sold after Edward died. We needed the money. I remember calling the man who bought it, apologizing that one of the keys stuck in winter. He didn't care. Said it was for the grandkids to bang on. I wanted to tell him it wasn't a toy, that my fingers had made lullabies there, that Jacob once sat on my lap at 3 years old and pretended to compose a song he called Rocket Night. But I said nothing, just watched as it was wheeled away. Second, my laugh, not the polite chuckle, not the automatic response to someone else's story. I mean the real one, deep, head tossed back, eyes-watering laughter that feels like joy breaking the rules. I couldn't remember the last time I had let myself be undone by happiness. Third letters. I used to write them all the time, not for occasions, just because. I believed in ink and postage stamps, in folding your thoughts carefully and trusting someone to hold them. But I stopped when the letters stopped being returned. When it became clear my words were just ghosts tapping at a door no one wanted to open. Fourth, dancing. Edward and I used to dance in the kitchen, barefoot, always without music, just the sound of boiling pots and the creak of linoleum. After he passed, I danced once alone and felt like an imposter in my own memory. So I stopped. One by one, I had let these things die, not because I wanted to, because I thought I had no right to carry them forward into this new, narrowed life, because survival had required a kind of shedding, because the world doesn't always leave room for women who insist on keeping their fire. But now, after everything, I was beginning to wonder, what if grief is not a graveyard? What if it's a garden? Not everything buried stays dead. Some things wait, dormant, patient, waiting for the soil to be ready again. I told Lorraine I wanted to write a letter, a real one. Not to Anna or Jacob, I wasn't there yet, but to an old friend named Grace, someone I hadn't spoken to since before the stroke. She had been my neighbor back in the blue house. She was the one who brought me soup when I had the flu and snuck me chocolate when Edward went on his health kicks. We used to sit on the porch and laugh until our stomachs ached. I found her address in an old notebook. My hand trembled as I wrote, not from sadness, from disuse. The letter wasn't long, just enough to say, I'm still here. I thought of you today. I miss the way we used to laugh until the streetlights came on. It felt like planting a seed. That night, I asked Lorraine to play something on her little Bluetooth speaker. She chose a Nat King Cole song, the same one Edward used to hum when he forgot the lyrics. And I did something strange. I stood and danced. Not a full waltz, not a performance. Just one slow circle in the kitchen, my hands in the air, eyes closed, remembering the warmth of a hand in mine and the rhythm of two hearts that once beat in time. Lorraine didn't interrupt. She just watched, smiling. The next day, she found a secondhand keyboard at a thrift shop, hauled it home and placed it by the window. Said nothing. I sat there for an hour before I touched it. And when I did, when my fingers hit those plastic keys, I didn't play a song. I just pressed one note, held it, felt it vibrate through the bones of me. I hadn't let these things die, not really. I had just buried them too early. And now, one by one, I was digging them up again. The phone hadn't rung in days, and I hadn't expected it to. Most calls now were robocalls or appointment reminders. Occasionally, Lorraine's niece checking in, but no one else. Silence had become my default ringtone, a quiet I no longer resented. So when it rang that morning, the landline, the one Lorraine insisted on keeping in case of the end of the world, I nearly didn't answer. But something told me to pick up. I lifted the receiver. Hello, Sakri. There was a pause, then a breath. Then, Mom, I closed my eyes. I hadn't heard her voice in over a year, and yet I recognized it instantly. Iana, flat, cautious, strangely small. She didn't rush to fill the silence. That surprised me. Anna always used to fill space with words, with explanations, with her version of control. But now she waited. So I said it. I'm here. Another breath. I didn't think you'd answer. I almost didn't. That landed. I could hear her swallow on the other end. I got your letter, she said quietly. I never sent one. I know, she said. But Lorraine, she sent me something. I think she knew I wasn't brave enough to ask. I turned slightly toward the window. The roses were blooming again. More this year than last. That's the thing about recovery. It doesn't just continue. It multiplies. What did she send you? I asked. Copies, she said, of a few pages from your journal. My pulse didn't quicken. I didn't feel betrayed. I felt seen. Lorraine had done what I couldn't. I read them, Anna said, all night. Silence again. And then I didn't know you were in so much pain. You didn't want to know. That's fair. We stayed suspended there, two women on either end of an invisible line, threading a lifeline out of brutal honesty. I told myself, she said, that you'd be better off without my mess, that I was doing you a kindness by stepping back. You were doing yourself a kindness, I said. That's not the same thing. More silence. But it wasn't heavy this time. It felt like truth finally found a place to sit. I'm not calling to fix anything, she said. I know I can't. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know, I said. I wanted to tell you that I see it now, the cost of everything, what it took to love us, what it took to disappear. You didn't make me disappear, Anna. I did that to myself, but you didn't stop it either. I know. Her voice cracked on that last word, and for the first time in this whole long grief, I felt us standing on the same ground, different corners of it maybe, but finally facing the same direction. I have changed, she whispered. Or I'm trying to. I go to therapy now. I started writing again. I don't expect that to mean anything to you, but I wanted you to know. It means something, I said softly, even if it doesn't change everything. There was a long pause. Then, can I see you? I don't know, I said, honestly. I understand. I need to believe you see me now. Not just the mother, not just the woman who never said no, but the woman who had a name before you existed. I do, she said. I see her. Then give me time, I said. And if I choose to open that door again, I want to do it on mine. That's all I could hope for. The call ended, not with goodbye, but with silence, this time warm, shared. I sat there long after the dial tone faded, not because I was waiting, because I was remembering all the times I picked up a phone and no one answered, all the times I sat in a chair and no one came, all the times I thought I had to earn love by disappearing first. And now this time I had answered for me, not for her, not for peace, for truth. Lorraine walked in a few minutes later, holding a basket of clean laundry. She looked at my face. Was that who I think it was? I nodded. Are you okay? I think I said slowly, I'm finally real again. She didn't need to say anything else, because that was enough. There was one chair left in the house I hadn't sat in yet. It was old, wooden, tucked into the corner of Lorraine's reading room, beside the bookshelf that smelled of cedar and thyme. It was the kind of chair meant for pause, no wheels, no cushions, no handles, just stillness, just presence. For months, I had walked past it, choosing the soft recliner instead, or the window bench where I wrote. But on that morning, clear, bright wind threading through the curtains, I felt something change. I pulled the chair out gently and sat. No television, no book, no teacup, just me, just breath, just the sound of the wind and the creak of the floor beneath me. It felt holy, not in a church way, in a this is my body and I am still here way. I had spent so much of my life in chairs that felt like endings. The cold hospital seat, the visitor bench at the nursing home, the wheelchair by the window they rolled me into and forgot. Each one had become a sentence, a punctuation mark in someone else's paragraph. But this chair, this final chair, it was mine, not a symbol, a beginning. The room was small, cozy, shelves lined with books Lorraine had read and loved some with notes scribbled in the margins. A plant in the corner, drooping from winter, but still trying. A small frame photograph of her late husband on the sill, a man I never met, but felt I knew from the way she sometimes touched the frame as she passed. She walked in quietly, saw me there, didn't speak. She simply lit a candle and left. She always knew when to let silence do the speaking. I sat there for over an hour. I didn't move. I didn't perform. I didn't document it in my journal, because this wasn't for remembering. It was for releasing. Every moment of being overlooked. Every time I stayed silent to avoid being a burden. Every apology I made for existing. Every ache that I swallowed and told myself wasn't urgent. Gone. I had mourned myself so many times in so many versions. The young mother who lost herself in diapers and discounts. The widow who stopped setting her own place at the table. The forgotten elder in the hallway chair, watching the world flicker by like a life she once rented. But I wasn't mourning anymore. I was shedding. And underneath all of it, I found something raw and steady. Me, not the version who belonged to anyone else. Just the woman who had watched and waited and let go, and now sat in a chair, not because she was put there, but because she chose it. The door creaked open. Jacob stepped in. He didn't speak right away, just stood in the threshold like a boy again, unsure if he'd be welcomed in. I knocked, he said. Lorraine said you were up here. I nodded. I brought something, he said, and held up a canvas. It was a painting, simple, unpolished, a chair by a window, but this time the chair was empty, and the light poured in soft gold full of breath. I tried to capture it, he said. The moment you stood up, I took it from him, ran my hand over the ridges of dried paint. You remembered, I said. He smiled. I'm trying to. I leaned the canvas against the wall. I don't need to hang it, I said. I just need to know it was seen. He sat across from me, in silence. No need to explain anything. There are conversations that don't need words, reunions that don't need declarations, just presence, just return. The chair beneath me didn't creak. It held. So did I. I looked out the window and exhaled, not because I was letting go of pain, because I was letting in peace. For the first time, not the second, not the almost, but the first real time. I belonged to no one. And finally, I was home. Some treasures had been recovered. Others more valuable still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. I wasn't rescued. I wasn't redeemed by anyone else's change of heart. I found my way out, the long way, through silence, through memory, through the hard work of remembering who I had been before I was erased. I had once been the woman who waited by the window for someone to come. Now I was the one who got up. The grief didn't vanish. The hurt didn't rewrite itself into joy. But the weight shifted. It loosened. And in its place, something solid grew. I had forgiven, but not forgotten. I had remembered, but no longer relived. And in doing so, I had reclaimed the one thing that had been mine all along. Choice, where to sit, when to stand, what to carry, and what to finally set down. If you are reading this, if you've ever sat in a chair and felt invisible, if you've ever been left behind by the very people you held up, I want you to know this. You are not a mistake. You are not your usefulness. You are not the silence they left you with. You are still fire, even in stillness, especially there. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.